Hi, can you guys hear me? Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me? Hi, Bronwyn, can you hear me?
Okay, now it should be working for me too.
Hey, Misha, I can't hear you.
But I guess now you can. So now you can hear me, I guess.
Hello?
Misha, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fabulous.
Hi, I can hear you guys as well now. Hi,
Great.
Bronwyn, I'm Ellen.
Hi, Ellen. Sorry, I was having some problems with Zoom. It wasn't connecting properly. It was a bit of a drama going on.
It's always fun with these kind of things.
Of course.
So, Bronwyn, do you want to check if you can create those rooms?
Absolutely. Hang on a minute.
I'm just gonna stop sharing.
Okay, and hang on a minute. Let's see. Stop sharing. Let's see if I'm sharing my screen. I might need to be doing that to be able to do it. And no, actually, I can't.
Ellen, can you check if you can do it? Because currently you're the main host.
Yes, I can create breakout rooms.
Fabulous.
So either we can do it like you are just going to leave for a second, Ellen, and select Bronwyn as the main host, and she can do it herself, or we are doing it for you, Bronwyn.
Whichever is more, whichever's easier for you guys is fine with me. I don't mind.
Maybe I can just do it when we get up to it, so then you don't have to worry.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you that there are two sections. I'm just trying to give you the headings of the pages where I'm doing it now. So there's one that's fairly obvious. It actually says small group discussion on the slide. And I'm sort of thinking groups of sort of around 4 to 5 people would probably no more than 3 to 5 people is probably ideal. And that's probably, a good sort of 15 slides in. And then there's another one, maybe another 5 slides after that, that actually is entitled Activity Exploring Mental Illness.
Yep.
So they should be fairly obvious, I think.
Yep. And do you want 3 to 5 people in that one too?
Yeah, 3 to 5 people just randomly in rooms is fine.
Yep. Cool.
Great. Thank you.
No worries. I think I'll wait just a few more minutes, see if we get any more people joining before we start. That's okay?
Sure.
Sounds good. And Bronwyn, just again, if we get some questions through Zoom, we will just ask them to you in the end.
Sure, that's fine.
We can just discuss them as a Q&A.
Sounds good.
Okay, we're up to 11 people. I guess I might start with the kind of the introduction, and then hopefully by the time you get started, Bronwyn, we've got some more people coming, but I guess I'll just start everything off then.
Sure, sounds fine.
Cool. So hi everyone. Thanks for coming to our workshop today called Talking the Talk. My name is Ellen. I'm moderating this session along with Misha, who is also here. And today's talk is going to be hosted by Dr. Bronwyn Robson, who is a counsellor at Student Services. So firstly, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the custodianship of the lands on which we meet. On behalf of the Faculty of Medicine, I would like to pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. So I would like to firstly encourage everyone to attend all the other sessions that we've also got going on for the rest of this week. So we're here on Wednesday afternoon at the moment. So we've still got a few great sessions coming up on Thursday and Friday this week, as well as some good sessions with student presenters, which I'd encourage you to all go along to. You can scan this QR code to get the links to these, or you can also just search the Faculty of Medicine HDR Symposium on Google. So as I said, this workshop is being held by Dr. Bronwyn Robson, who is a counsellor at the Student Services, and she's been there for nearly 5 years now. Prior to becoming a counsellor, Bronwyn had a varied career, including working as a research scientist and in real estate, as well as running her own business. Her background is in biological sciences, and she has a PhD in evolutionary genetics. In her current role, Bronwyn provides personal counselling to students from across the university and conducts wellness-based workshops and training for HDR students. And just a small housekeeping thing. So after the workshop, we would like to get everyone's feedback through a poll. So if you can just stick around for a couple of minutes after the workshop, I'll put a poll up and that would be great. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Bronwyn, and she is going to talk to us about talking the talk. So thank you, Bronwyn.
Great, thank you very much. So I'll stop your screen for the moment, Ellen.
Yep.
And pop mine up there to share. I can get into, whoops, there we go. So yes, so thank you for having me again, folks. This is my second time in this week, and I really appreciate being part of the Faculty of Medicine as well as the, oops, sorry, I've left that as Faculty of Science. Apologies for that. I hope I've loaded up the right workshop. I think I have, so we should be good. Let me just double check something. I've just realized I had a Faculty of, no, it looks like we should be right. Okay, let me go back to, there we go. All right, my apologies for that. So yes, so I just wanted to say thank you to everybody in the Faculty of Science for inviting me along to this today. And thank you to Ellen for introducing me. As she said, my name's Bronwyn Robson. I do have a background as a scientist, and yes, I have a PhD and I did not go mad. I also have been a high school teacher. I'm now working as a counsellor in student services, and I also do a lot of the mental health first aid instruction here at UQ for students. So my background started off originally in microbiology, biochemistry, and population genetics, and then I moved on and did a PhD looking at chromosomal speciation in native Australian radish species. Because of the background that I have in biology and genetics and such, my counselling approach is very much based on a framework of biology, evolution, and neuroscience. And the area that I'm currently researching is animal-assisted interventions for counselling in tertiary contexts. So today, to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be looking at some of the wellness issues that are actually faced. Nope, I apologize. If you could give me 2 seconds, I realized I have actually loaded up the wrong workshop. I will be back in 2 seconds. Just a minute. Sorry about this, folks.
No worries.
I can't believe I did that. Just what happens when you've got two that are sitting next to each other in the files that have got the same name.
Yeah.
So sorry about this. Oops.
Okay, I'm back. And again, my apologies. This particular computer only has a one USB port on it, so I had to take my headphones out to be able to see what was actually going on. So we'll get back to it now. There we are. So already introduced myself. Agenda for today, apologies. So as I said, we're going to be looking at some of the wellness issues that are actually faced by HDR students. We're going to look at your lived experience of change and stress and anxiety, particularly in the time of COVID-19 as we are in at the moment and have been all year, and also looking at how you can get your basic psychological needs met when there is so much uncertainty around in the world at the moment. Then we'll focus a little bit more on the experience of stress specifically and how you can identify a distress in people and predict whether or not people are going to be vulnerable to it. So both yourselves and others. And then we're going to go beyond this experience of just stress to have a bit of a look at the concept of mental crises and how you can actually be there to support somebody who does have a mental illness or is experiencing a mental health crisis. We're going to have some interactive sections in this session, and we'll also be able to talk about some of the supports that are available to you both internally at UQ and externally as well. So I want to ask you how many of you have ever felt like this? That idea that you simply can't work hard enough, you feel overwhelmed by your workload, you may not be working to your true ability. It may be that you're struggling to focus, or that you feel like nothing you do has impact, control. It can be it can seem as though things that even in the past have been really simple actually start to become really difficult for you, which can lead to this constant fear of failure. You feel that you don't belong in a Faculty of Medicine program and that you're going to be found out, and you might be experiencing physical or mental exhaustion. These things are certainly feelings are common, and I guess we could consider them normal, but it's normal experiences to have as part of a PhD. But it's important to realize that just because it's normal within the cohort does not necessarily mean that it's healthy. These are things that can actually be warning signs to indicate that your well-being is actually on the decrease, and they are things that we shouldn't actually be avoiding. So I want to make sure that the first thing that I impart upon you today is please don't be afraid to ask for healthy ways to manage your stress and for help when it comes to managing your stress. Different people certainly deal with stress in different ways, but this is something that you're not alone in. So don't be afraid to ask your friends, your family, your colleagues, and healthcare professionals for healthy ways to be able to manage stress. The reason why this is so important is because there are a lot of wellness issues that are faced specifically by tertiary students. So if we look at the population in general, and this isn't looking specifically at tertiary students, this is just looking at the population in general, we know that about 10.8% of males and about 17.9% of females are going to experience anxiety in any given calendar year. Similarly, about 5.3% of males and 7.1% of females are going to experience depression or bipolar disorders in any one calendar year. If we look at any common mental illness that includes anxiety, depression, and substance use disorders, we're looking at 20% of the population experiencing these in any given calendar year, and that's the population between the ages of 16 and 85. On top of this, another 0.45% of people are also going to experience psychotic disorders in any one calendar year. Now, the thing is, this is a pretty high statistic within the general population. And yet we know that these sorts of illnesses are actually at higher incidence in tertiary populations. And the thing is, when it comes to people actually getting help for these, only about 35% who have a common mental illness are actually going to seek professional help. And we know that this is because there are some barriers that are out there. But the reality is that it's not only these sorts of clinical issues like anxiety and depression, but the other issues that tertiary students may face are things like feeling very isolated because the experience that you're having is quite different to what other people may have. There can be lots of strain on relationships, whether that's relationships with your family, relationships with your friends because of your availability, or relationships with your colleagues and supervisors because of altering or differing expectations. We know that the concept of imposter syndrome, that feeling that you don't belong, that you lucked out in getting here, that you're not good enough and that you're going to be found out, is actually something that's very common, not only among tertiary students, but among academics as well. And the concept of perfectionism is actually really common. There's a commonly held misbelief that perfectionism is something that is actually a characteristic to aspire to. But studies have actually shown that perfectionism is actually more likely to stand in the way of people performing well than it is to actually help them. If perfectionism is something that you really struggle with, make sure you pop over and have a look at the Graduate School's Career Development Framework, as we certainly do run a workshop on perfectionism on a fairly regular basis, about four times a year. Other illnesses that tertiary students face are the uncertainty about the future. People who have a job or have another role in life might feel that they have some security in that, but you know that your experience as a student is something that's going to soon come to an end, even if soon as a couple of years away still. But that means that it's like, what comes next? And this is something that often plays in the mind. And because tertiary students, particularly HDR students, are quite driven in their studies, we find that there's a lack of balance, and this lack of balance can negatively impact their well-being. All of these sort of things can sort of have elements of stress associated with them, and we certainly know that stress is something which, high levels of stress is something that can potentially put people at risk of poorer mental health. So just a couple of little facts and figures for you that have come out in the not too distant past. So a cross-sectional study of 431 Australian nursing students found that stress and burnout levels increased across their years of study, and by the completion of their course, up to 20% of students were reporting signs of serious maladaptive fatigue or stress. Now, similarly, a study at the University of Sydney a while back found that psychological distress increased across the final years of medical training and continued into internship. And by the end of their internship, 37% of these students reported that they were experiencing significant psychological distress. So some of you may be going on to, or may already be doctors and are coming back to do research, but we're going back to that field. Some of you may be doing MDs at the same time that you're doing your PhDs, or some of you may be doing PhDs first with the intention of going into medicine. And if that's the case, you know, that this is something that may very well continue for you. So I felt that it was really important to be able to have that opportunity to talk to you about some of the about ways that you can actually be prepared for some of the wellness issues that you might face. So one of the ways I like to do this is through this little metaphor, I guess. It's based on something called the consistency theory by Kay Graver, who was a German psychotherapist. And it's a view of mental functioning derived from both broadly accepted findings that goals and schemas govern mental activity, and from Graver's own argument that goal formation is developed to satisfy basic needs. There are 4 basic psychological needs. If you can imagine that the most primal of these basic needs is a sense of safety. And this is here to represent that this is like the foundation of a building. Now, the roof that this building holds up is about our sense of self-esteem, our sense of self, our place in the world, our self-worth. And then there are 3 pillars, which are our other basic needs, that hold up this roof from this foundation of safety. The first of those is attachment. So if any of you have studied psychology, we're talking about fairly classic John Bowlby / Mary Ainsworth issues here. But for those of you who haven't, in attachment, we're talking about the capacity for someone to be able to create secure, healthy relationships with other people. And this is something that certainly develops at least in infancy, if not even potentially before, through mother-child interactions in utero. The second one of these pillars is actually pleasure, with the flip side of being pain. So this is about being able to do things that are pleasurable and not having to do things that are distressing or painful or uncomfortable. And then the third of these basic psychological needs is a sense of control. This doesn't mean being controlling or being a control freak of a person, but rather it means having choices available to you, and you are able to choose which of those choices you actually pursue. So no choice is certainly a violation of that need for control, but sometimes too many choices can be violating as well if it leads to an experience of indecision. So we can look at this concept of consistency as it's sort of described as being compatibility of many simultaneous transpiring mental processes. And it's a systemic demand. So all of these things are going on in us at once. And the idea is for them to sit at a fairly balanced, neutral sort of level. And the mechanisms that we use to either avoid or correct states of inconsistency are our behavior strategies, our defense mechanisms, our coping strategies, that sort of thing. So when we have congruence, these elements are in harmony with each other. And there's compatibility between what motivates our goals and our perceptions of reality. So if we look at this, this process, or this sort of diagram, and again, imagining it like a house, when people have experiences where these needs are actually met, so they're able to attach securely to primary caregivers in their lives and have a good role modeling for healthy, secure relationships in the future, where their lives are predominantly about being able to do things that are pleasurable and comfortable rather and not distressing, and where they're able to have control and make choices, the world seems like a safe place. And if we use an example of, say, a baby who has a wet nappy, so if the baby has a wet nappy, it's going to let the world know about it, and it's going to cry. When that baby cries, in normal healthy circumstances, the primary caregiver is going to come over, they're going to soothe that baby, they're going to give them what it is that they need in terms of turning that discomfort into comfort. By doing that, And having expressed themselves and having that need met gives the baby a sense of control, and it also helps to reinforce the relationship between the child and then the caregiver, which makes the world seem like a safe place because needs have been met. So when this is something that carries on predominantly through life, people's behaviors become motivated by patterns of approach. In other words, if you can imagine that an approach goal is one where you see something you want, you move towards it and achieve it, you know that you've achieved it, and then you can move on to the next goal that you set for yourself. And this is basically a way that we're able to thrive in life. Unfortunately, this isn't always what happens. And there are things that can damage our attachments, so unhealthy relationships. There are things that expose us to pain, discomfort, and distress. And there are things that take away our sense of control. And we experience things which can violate our sense of safety as well. Now, when these structures, these basic needs and this primal need of safety, they can be either, they can have experiences of really shocking, destructive blows in one small hit, for example, when someone experiences trauma, or they can be something that happens systemically over long periods of time. For example, when someone experiences neglect or abandonment, those sorts of things. But whatever it may be, if these things are being damaged, whether it's those big cracks or slowly chipping away at them, rather than being in this thriving state, we actually go into a survival state where our motivations for our behaviors are driven by avoiding things that are bad for us or things that are threatening, not necessarily bad for us, but things that are threatening for us. So instead of being in a state where we approach the things that we want, we're in a state where we are avoiding the things that we don't want. Now, what this actually ends up meaning is that we're constantly in a state of arousal against threat. And that's certainly going to have follow-on hormonal effects, such as an increase in levels of adrenaline and cortisol. And these can have detrimental effects on both of our brains and our bodies when we experience them over long periods of time. And in fact, the more our brains actually become wired into these patterns of avoidance, the more we're likely to experience anxiety and depression. So now in the time of COVID, certainly, you can probably imagine that there are experiences that people have been having that are likely to chip away at some of these basic and primal needs that we may have. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. The thing is, I guess, that COVID highlights is that changes, particularly changes that are out of our control, can be quite stressful for us because they can actually violate these basic needs. So let's have a look at this idea of change and how it impacts both stress and anxiety. Excuse me. So it's important to realize that stress is actually a normal part of life, as is change, but both of them can actually be downright scary. And so if we're experiencing a lot of change, that can actually cause a lot of stress. It doesn't really seem to matter whether the stress is something that's positive or negative, it can still have an impact on us. So when we're talking about something that is a positive desired change, it might be something like starting a new job or starting a new PhD project or starting, getting married or something like that. But these things are still going to be stressful. And when we experience a lot of emotional discomfort that becomes beyond our capacity for our coping strategies to manage, we start to experience distress. So, as we said, change is a normal part of life, but when we encounter it, basically what happens in our brains is that we start to assess if we actually have some way of being able to manage the situation. And if not, that gets perceived by our bodies as a threat to our survival, a threat to our well-being, and it kicks in those threat responses as a result. These can be both psychological emotions like anxiety and anger, but it can also be physiological as well. So as I said, with the adrenal response. The release of cortisol and adrenaline is also going to cause things like an elevated heart rate, elevated respiration, increased blood flow, and changes in both the digestive and immune systems that are usually going to cause a depression. These fight or flight responses are perfectly normal for an immediate physical threat, and they are a good thing. I can't stress this enough, that these stress responses that we have are actually a good thing. But unfortunately, our body isn't able to differentiate when the threat is something that is a physical life threat, or whether it's a threat to our finances, or whether it's a threat to our relationship. It just sees it as a threat. And as a result, we get the same physiological response. Now, you might be able to have, you might have had an experience yourself where you've had some anxiety and had some stress and have felt those physiological responses, that increase in respiration, the elevated heart rate, that distressed tummy because you're feeling stress. So when we're experiencing non-immediate physical life threats, the stress is usually something that's actually going to go for longer, and it's going to go on for longer than our body's normal adaptation for the fight or flight responses. And this is when they actually become unhelpful, and they can actually lead to health problems. So one of the reasons why these stresses, these changes that people experience can be such a problem for them is because it causes them to feel out of control. So if we think back to that last series of diagram that I had, control is certainly important because it's one of those basic psychological needs. And if people are in a state where they're feeling as though they are out of control, then they're going to, that can potentially switch their behaviors into these avoidance goals and these avoidance behavior patterns rather than the approach-based thriving ones. So survival obviously is important, but it doesn't help us when it comes to our quality of life. So as it says here, different people do react differently to stress, and as a result, they're going to respond differently to change. Some people are able to take it in stride and actually love it, while other people, even small changes can be really distressing. So, however, despite the fact that different people are going to instinctively respond differently to change, you can make choices about how you can respond to them. So you can actually take back some of the control that may feel like it's been taken from you. And this is important because chronic stress can cause things such as poor immune function, insomnia, clinical anxiety, muscle tension and pain, high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, and depression. So we want you as students, as postgraduate students, to be able to face the changes that you're going to be experiencing all the time in your candidature and be able to make choices about how you respond to them to help prevent you from falling into these unwell states. So with that in mind, let's specifically have a little bit of a look at the big change that we've all experienced this year, which is certainly about COVID. So it's very normal when you're in this state of change, and particularly one that does seem quite threatening, that you're going to be feeling a lot of different emotions. Certainly a lot of people are feeling stressed and overwhelmed, worry, racing minds that can often make it difficult to sleep. You may not be able to do your normal activities, but even if you can, you may not enjoy them as much. There's usually going to be a lot of frustration and irritability around in people because that's still an expression of fear. A sense of helplessness because you feel out of control and you can't change things. And then there's that disconnect from other people, which is something that, in times of lockdown, we haven't actually been able to avoid. And even if we're allowed to go into public spaces, sometimes that can be quite scary. And I still know a lot of people, despite the figures that we're having in Queensland specifically and Australia generally, who are still really anxious about that idea of going out into public. So a psychologist and doctor that I have worked with in the past by the name of Russ Harris has come up with this little acronym about how we can help to manage our experience in this time of the coronavirus, and he calls it FACE COVID, and it's a great little acronym. So first of all, he says the F stands for focus on what's in your control. So the single most useful thing that anyone can do in a time of crisis, whether it's coronavirus related or otherwise, is to focus on what it is that's actually in your control. You can't control what happens in the future. You can't control COVID-19 itself or the world economy or how your government manages the whole mess. And you can't magically control your feelings either. You can't eliminate all of that perfectly natural fear and anxiety, but you can actually control what it is that you do in the here and now, and that actually matters. So this involves both dealing with your inner world, so all of the difficult thoughts and feelings that you might actually have, and the outer world. So the real problems that you're actually facing in the world. Question is, how do we do this? Well, I want you to picture this. If you're out at sea and a large storm blows up, or if you're at the sea and a large storm blows up, any boats that are in a harbor there are going to drop anchor. Okay, that's going to help to keep them grounded. And if they don't do that, they're going to get swept out. Doing that, dropping anchor, doesn't actually make the storm go away, but it does actually help to keep you steady until the storm actually passes. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is this concept of dropping anchor. And there's 3 ways that we actually do this. First is through the A, which is acknowledging your thoughts and feelings. C is about coming back into your body. In other words, being in the present moment rather than being in your brain, which is going, what if, what if, what if? And E is about engaging in what it is that you're actually doing. So you can think of it from the perspective that in an ongoing crisis, we're all going to experience quite regular emotional storms. This might be unhelpful thoughts that are spinning inside your head. It might be painful feelings that are whirling around inside your body. But if you get swept away by that storm inside of you, there's really nothing effective that you can actually do. So the first practical step is for you to be able to drop anchor. And you do that using the ACE, the ACE component of this particular acronym. So the A, acknowledging your thoughts and feelings, is about silently and being kind to yourself, acknowledging whatever it is that's actually showing up inside your thoughts. So this may be feelings, it may be emotions, it may be memories, it may be sensations, or even urges. That's perfectly normal, just acknowledging them. Secondly, the C is about coming back to your body and coming back and connecting with your physical body. So you're not trying to turn away from or escape or avoid what's happening in your inner world, those thoughts and feelings. The aim for this little part of the exercise is to remain aware of your thoughts and feelings, but still to be able to continue to acknowledge their presence and at the same time connect back with your body by actively moving it. You might think, well, why is this important? The reason for this is so that you can gain as much control as possible over your physical actions, even though you can't control your feelings. So F is about focus what's in your control, and that's what coming back into your body is about. So E, engage in what you're doing, is coming back to getting a sense of where you are and refocusing on your attention on the activity that you're actually doing. And sometimes it can help to choose what that activity actually is. It might be choosing to focus on your senses. For example, saying, I'm going to focus on all of the things in this room that are a particular color. Or it might be focusing on sound by saying, I'm going to put my headphones in and I'm going to listen to a piece of music and I'm going to pick out, all the different instruments that I can hear, something like that. But because your senses are in your body and your body is inherently in the present moment, that helps that grounding, that dropping anchor experience. Now, we've only covered the first bit, this drop anchor component of the FACE COVID acronym that Russ has come up with. So let's have a look at what some of these other elements are. C is about committed action, and that basically means effective action. So it's something that's going to be guided by your core values. So by core values, I mean the things that drive action that you take because it's actually important to you. You take it even if it does bring up difficult thoughts, difficult feelings, or maybe even difficult experiences. The O is about opening up, and this means making room for those difficult feelings and being kind to yourself. It's okay to have these feelings, but it's important that you're actually kind to yourself when you do. You can't stop these things from arising. They're normal reactions to have, but you can open up and make room for them. Acknowledge that they're normal and allow them to be there, even though they're uncomfortable, even though that they may hurt, but treat yourself kindly with self-compassion in those moments. The self-kindness, that caring for yourself, is actually really important and essential when it comes to coping with a crisis. So V, as I said, is about values, which I mentioned before. So it's an important little exercise to do can actually be to consider, what are my core values? What do you want to stand for in the face of this crisis? What sort of person do you want to be as you go through it? And how do you want to treat yourself and others in this experience? If you want to find out more about values, pretty much any one of the counsellors in the student services team would be happy to talk to you more and help you to find out what your values are. Then the I is about identifying your resources, and that's certainly something else we're going to be doing in this workshop, is looking at different resources that are available to you. And the resources might be for help, for assistance, for support, for advice, for guidance, whatever it may be. But make sure that you've got, a bit of a toolbox of resources available to you. And then the last one, which we're probably, particularly being in the faculties and that you're in the laboratories that you're in, is about that staying distance and disinfecting, which isn't, starting to be less of an issue, I guess, these days, but still something that we want to be mindful of and be caring for, as much as is realistically possible for the greater good of ourselves and for our community. But remember that when we're talking about distant, we're talking about physical distance and certainly not about emotional distance. So let's talk about how we use that concept of those basic needs, those 4 elements that I mentioned before, and how we use those specifically in order to manage stress and anxiety, whether it's something that's from COVID or whether it's something completely different. So I mentioned attachment before, and I just wanted to give you this little quote from Schaefer from 2004, which says, "The biological function of attachment is survival. The psychological function is to gain security." So the attachment does connect to that, drive for survival, which is necessary and is present in all of us. But the psychological function of it, as we said, is also about security and safety. So these different elements are actually linked to each other. And I certainly feel that attachment is a really important elements in maintaining our well-being, and it is something that potentially has been at a lot of risk for a lot of people during this time of social isolation and social distancing and that sort of thing. So one of the things that you can do to manage your stress and anxiety is think about this concept of attachments, or in other words, your relationships. So reach out and stay supported, reach out to other people, seek the support that you actually need, and that might be in the context of your emotional needs, or it might be in the context of your academic needs, but stay connected. Don't feel that this is something that you have to do on your own. There's an expression that I love that says that when it comes to a PhD, you're in this for yourself, but you're not in it by yourself. So make sure that you take advantage of the various supports that are available for you. It might involve, making sure that you're still maintaining social catch-ups with people, such as having virtual coffees or lunches, with other PhD students, because having those connections with other PhD students is also something that I think is really important, because these are people who actually understand the experience that you're going through, and understand the stresses that you're facing. And having someone who has that shared lived experience can actually make the process a lot easier, which is why it might be handy to have a check-in buddy. So that might be somebody else who is within your faculty, or maybe it's somebody that's outside of your faculty who's still a PhD student or some other sort of student, or it might even be, a family member, but just somebody with whom you can check in periodically and make sure that you're tracking okay. But as I said, do make sure that you are communicating with other HDR students. When it comes to the basic need of pleasure, when we're in this state where there is so much anxiety around because of COVID, the changes that it's had in relationships, the changes that it's had in employability, so many changes at one time, all the more reason why we have to be mindful and deliberate about still getting our pleasure in life. I know that certainly one of my big sources of pleasure is international travel, and so I've been pretty devastated that that's something I haven't been able to do. But it's certainly something that I have tried to compensate for by doing other things that are pleasurable. That still include travel, but just not necessarily the international travel. So when it comes to your HDR projects, do make sure that you set some boundaries with your work. Don't think that because you don't have as many commitments perhaps with socializing, that you can't go on holidays and those sorts of things, that means you should, interstate or internationally or what have you. Don't think that this means I take that time and funnel it into my project instead, because if you do that, it's a little bit like putting all of your eggs in one basket and you run the risk of burning out. So make sure that you're still engaging in other things in your life, that you have other things in your life to make sure that you stay balanced and grounded. It can be really important that if you're working from home, that you have a separate workspace, so that you're not trying to do your PhD or your writing for your research and that sort of thing in the same space where you do your socializing and your family activities and your eating and those sorts of things. That just helps with that division of purpose, which is actually good for our minds. And then there's this concept of take 10 to Zen, which I really like. And it's the idea that sometimes you just need to take 10 minutes to stop and to chill, to do nothing. Maybe it's meditate, maybe it's watch funny cat videos on YouTube, but just take 10 minutes away to do something else so that you can clear some of the cobwebs out of your mind. I think it's also important to realize that pleasure is something that can be really powerful when we use it appropriately. So if you use pleasure as a reward, you're effectively conditioning yourself and using positive reinforcement in order to do that. So let's say that you have a chapter of a thesis that you're trying to write. If you say to yourself, once I've completed this section, I get to have this particular reward, and then you set another goal, that's going to actually reinforce you engaging in those behaviors that got you to achieve that goal in the first place, because you're using that positive reinforcement. I wouldn't advise using solely foods as positive reinforcement, because that could be problematic in its own, but think of lots of different things. It might be phone calls with friends. It might be, doing a particular, creative activity. It might be getting to have some time to veg out. It might be, getting to take a little bit of extra time to cook something yummy for yourself, but mix it up a little bit. And pleasure is also about self-care, and we'll talk about self-care more later. I think it's just important to note that self-care is not those things that you tell yourself you should do for your well-being, but they are those things that you actually enjoy doing because they refresh and revitalize you. Now, our most primal need, as I said, was that sense of safety. And that safety actually comes down from being able to, one of the ways that we can actually use this concept of safety to manage stress and anxiety is, as we said in that little FACE COVID acronym that we had, acknowledge what it is that you're thinking and feeling. If you're bottling it up, it's a little bit like sweeping a room, and instead of sweeping it all up into a dustpan and taking the dirt out, it's like sweeping under a rug. And initially that may not be a problem, but if that's all that you keep doing, then eventually you're going to end up with a big mound that you're not going to be able to work around. It's going to be a pain. And if you then try and remove it, when you lift the rug up, everything's going to get flown up everywhere, and it's going to be even harder to get rid of than it was initially. So acknowledge those thoughts and feelings that you have and process them. Identify what the resources are, where you can get help from when you need it, and know what your values are, because goals are important things to have in life. But if all we're doing is aiming for different goals, then that can actually become stressful in and of itself. But if your goals are things that are driven by your values, then, and you're living to those values, then even if the goals don't get achieved or have to get postponed, you still can take satisfaction in the fact that you've been living to those characteristics that are important to you. Also, in terms of safety, a way that you can actually combine the concept of safety and control is by completing a plan, or creating a plan, and a plan specifically to maintain your health. This is something that certainly needs to be both physical and mental and spiritual as well. Different people experience spirituality in different ways, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be a religious way, but that spirituality in terms of connecting into your heart and soul. And then that last of our basic needs, the concept of control. As we said, again, linking back into the FACE COVID, focus on what it is that you can control. You may not be able to control the big things that are going on in the world, but there are still small things in your life that you can control. So be conscious of the fact that you do have choices to make, and which choices you're actually choosing to make, because sometimes you may think, I'm not going to do anything about that, but that in itself is actually a choice in some way or another. So set some limits with yourself in terms of being bombarded with information that may not necessarily be helpful or healthy for you. So things like, news outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, those sorts of things. And I'm not saying don't use them, but be mindful about them and set some limits so that you're not being overwhelmed by them, because there can be a lot of inaccurate or unhelpful information that's actually on them. Certainly any PhD student that I support, I talk to them about the importance of having, a routine and a plan and managing your time well. If you struggle with that, come along and see one of the learning advisors at Student Services, and they can help out. But one of the things, being a geneticist, I always say is that redundancy, like in the genetic code, is the key. That way, if you need to have small changes, it's easy enough to tweak things. You can do a bit of timetable Tetris and shuffle things around so that you can still fit everything in that you need to do, including the self-care sort of activities. So as we said, we mentioned the fact that stress is a normal part of life, and we can sort of define it or describe it as saying that stress is the body's response to something that demands adaptation. Now, you know, and we also talked about the fact that that tertiary students have a lot of wellness issues. So I guess I want to pose the question to you, are students more stressed than the general population? Interestingly, some study was actually done on this not that long ago, about 10 years ago, right here at UQ by a researcher by the name of Helen Stallman. And at that point, she actually polled people from the general population and compared it to students at both UQ and QUT. And she found out that 29% of the general population described themselves as being stressed, but 84% of students did. And that's probably because of the characteristics that are inherent to a study environment, the competition, the constant assessment, the transitional stage of life, the uncertainties about the future, all of those sorts of things. The thing is, it's important to realize that stress is actually something that's necessary for us. We do need to have stress, if we look at this little graph over here, to motivate us in order to actually be able to get up, get going, and be alert. And what we aim for is to be at this point where we have a moderate amount of stress, which is within our capacity to manage, that allows us to perform at our optimum. However, we are often in situations, particularly as postgraduate students and now in this time of uncertainty with coronavirus, where we get pushed past this optimal point, where our coping strategies no longer seem to be cutting it. And that's when we start to experience the anxiety and disorganization associated with distress. So some of the things that may predict that a student is particularly vulnerable to distress are having, poor coping skills and low self-efficacy, but also some other things like high perfectionism, poor time management skills, beliefs about themselves that are self-defeating, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm comparing myself to other students and I see myself lacking in some way, and the distorted thinking, so very black and white thinking or very rule-based thinking, I should, I ought, I must, with very little areas of grey or very little flexibility. Another thing we know is that low university connectedness is an indicator. So if you don't feel as though UQ is someplace where you actually belong and where you are supported, that can contribute to you experiencing distress. And then, of course, the lack of social or family support means that people are more likely to experience distress. Now, a lot of you may be in situations where you've come from other places in order to study at UQ, and you may not necessarily have your family around or the same social connections that you've had before. And I would like to say that those are something that you can work at creating through various avenues at UQ, whether it's through the Postgraduate Student Association or whether it's various activities that are held by the Faculty of Medicine or other things that are organized by the grad school. But having that sense of belonging here and feeling comfortable here will actually help to improve you in your studies. I sort of skipped over perfectionism a little bit because I did want to say that, perfectionism, as I said before, is something that's rife within the postgraduate population. And we're happy to help out with that if that is something that you're experiencing difficulty with. So let's have a look now at some of these. So we've looked at some of the things that may predict student distress, and we've said that students are at risk of problems with their well-being. So let's look at what some of the warning signs are. And first off, we're going to start looking at what you might observe in other people. So you might see someone else who's normally quite on the ball being vague, seeming confused or agitated. You might see physical symptoms such as them, breathing differently, awkwardly, being restless and fidgety, perhaps sweating excessively compared to what they used to. Or you might notice them being really tired, falling asleep, while they're on campus or out in field work. Or I had a friend that I did my PhD with, and I swear I have seen that man fall asleep face down on a centrifuge while it was going. I don't know how he did it, but he was face down on the centrifuge while it's whirling around. And I've also seen him fall asleep sitting up in a backless lab bench with a pen hanging out of his mouth. I still don't know how he did it. But, so if you're fatigued enough, you can probably do that. But fatigue, ongoing fatigue, is certainly a potential sign of problems with well-being. As are outbursts emotionally. It can be anger, it can be frustration, it can be, tears, all of those sorts of things. But, I think that hopefully from that little diagram that we looked at the beginning with the consistency theory and the basic needs, you can see that avoidance, whether it's avoidance of tasks, avoidance of social connections, but avoidance is something that should make you go, oh, is that person having some issues? Because that is an example of the brain starting to wire into that survival mode, which rather than in that thriving mode. So people who are avoiding tasks, or you're noticing a significant decline in either the amount of work that they're producing or how good it is. If people are not showing up to things, whether it's showing up to lab meetings or showing up to the lab, whether it's not attending social gatherings they used to attend to before, those sorts of things. If you're tutoring, undergraduate students, you might find that they are not showing up to tutorials, or that they're often asking for extensions with not terribly legit sort of reasons for it. Or you might find that those students are overly dependent on you or on other sort of staff that you might be working with. So these are examples of some of the things that you might notice in other people, whether they are fellow HDR students, whether they are undergraduates that you may be supporting or supervising or tutoring in some way, or whether it's the other staff who might be in the lab that you're working in, the RAs and that sort of thing. Because anybody can actually get, these experiences of difficulty in their well-being because of stress, anxiety, burnout, that sort of thing. But what might you actually see in yourself? Because sometimes it can be easy to notice these things in other people than it is to notice them in yourself, particularly if you are in a bit of a state of avoidance about avoiding, what you're actually experiencing in your own mind. So some of the things you might notice are that you are feeling frequently frazzled and overwhelmed, that your mood is low to the point where you no longer feel like you're in control. You might have thoughts around the idea of, I can't work hard enough, I can't focus, I have no control. You might always be worrying, whether that's about your project, your writing, your relationships. They might not feel real solid. You may feel quite isolated and alone, even when you're surrounded by people, or you might find yourself withdrawing from social connections. You might find yourself feeling that you're going to fail at what it is you're doing, feeling that you're exhausted all the time, that you can't focus, that you're procrastinating and are neglecting responsibilities that you have, or that you may not feel confident that you actually are going to have options in life. What do you do once you actually come out the other end of this research degree? So things that people may have, there are also things that people may have noticed in you if you're experiencing distress, which perhaps you're not picking up on yourself. They might have noticed changes in things like body language, your voice, your state of organization. So if somebody points out to you that they've noticed something, have a bit of a think about how you're going to respond to that. So, is the questioner somebody who has your best intentions in mind? Why do they actually want to know what's going on for you? But even if they're not somebody that you want to talk about your state with, it might still be a flag for you that you do need to talk to someone. You might also want to think about how you actually answer the question and how that response could affect you given the person that's actually asked the question. So for example, it might be somebody in your lab who you don't want to know that you're really struggling. Maybe it's a supervisor, for example, and you think, oh, yep, no, I don't want them to know what's going on because I don't want to experience any different treatment or any judgment. But obviously things are not great and I do need to go and talk to somebody else. It might be that somebody has overly high expectations of you, which are putting a lot of pressure on you. And maybe it is about talking with them then, but talking about the concept of boundaries. So think about if you get asked about, are you experiencing distress? Think about who's asking it, why they're asking it, and how you want to respond. So, sometimes it's okay if somebody asks you something like that to say, no, I'm not really okay, but I don't think there's anything you can do about it. And thanks for asking. So you don't necessarily have to give them all the details about what's going on. Or I'm not okay, but I don't really want to talk about it right now. Those sorts of things. So don't feel that if you're not feeling okay, that you have to respond with lots and lots of detail to the particular person who asks you, because there are other alternatives out there for you. There are, the counseling team, the international team, the learning team here at and the disability and diversity team here at Student Services. There are the doctors that are on campus, the medical doctors, and there's psychologists and psychiatrists down there as well. There's the UQ Psychology Clinic. There are mental health first aiders that are scattered around the campus as well, and the names and identifications of them are on websites on the UQ website as well. So don't feel that you necessarily have to talk to the person who has asked you these sorts of questions if that's not right for you, because we don't want to exacerbate if you are feeling distress. So a couple of other things that you might feel experience when you're just distressed, and this is sort of, I guess, more of the unconscious, I guess. but I think, as people who have got medical and paramedical or biomedical backgrounds, that this is probably a little bit of an interesting idea to think, okay, well, I know what I experience when I'm distressed, but why? What is it that's actually going on? So, when your heart's pounding, it's actually because of that fight or flight response trying to pump blood to relevant muscles. Same thing's going on for the fast breathing to increase oxygenation of muscle tissue. When you're experiencing those butterflies or nausea in the tummy, that's because if you're in that state, imagine that you're a primitive caveman and you're about to be attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. It's not terribly important for you to be able to digest your meal at that point, but it is really important for you to be able to run away. So your blood flow is actually going to move away from something that in that moment is considered to be irrelevant, like your digestive process, which is going to cause things like butterflies and nausea. It could cause that increased need to urinate or defecate in order to, reduce the weight, which is one of the reasons why sometimes if you've ever held like an insect or a little animal that feels threatened, it'll actually poop on you. That's what's going on there. When those muscles are all tensed up and ready to go, that can actually cause pain. And another area that's considered, fairly irrelevant if you're experiencing threat is your brain, your prefrontal areas of your brain. So your limbic system is pretty much going into overdrive at that state, and it's taking control, and it's shunting blood flow away from your prefrontal cortices, where cognitive functioning and executive functioning are going on. And that means that it can be very hard to speak clearly. It can be hard to concentrate. It can be hard to engage with your memory, all of those sorts of things. So realize that there are, legitimate biological reasons why you have all of these sorts of experiences. But if you can look at these symptoms or experiences as being your body getting prepared to help you rather than being something that's detrimental, it can really change the experience for you. There's a fabulous TED Talk by a health psychologist named Kelly McGonigal, and the TED Talk is called How to Make Stress Your Friend. And I would certainly highly recommend that to anyone if you think that you have an inescapable experience of stress, but you would like to change your experience of it and minimize its impact on you. So I'm going to get Ella now to break you into a couple of groups. How are we doing in terms of people? So we'll break you into groups of, about 4 or 5, and I'm going to give you about a couple of minutes to have a small group discussion about what you would actually do if you had noticed that someone was distressed and you wanted to be able to help them. So how would you actually approach them? What sort of things, where would you do it? When would you do it? What sort of things would you say in order to, try and connect with someone who you think is feeling distressed? So Ellen, could you create those breakout rooms for us? So if we've got 13 people minus me, 12, I guess. So so say 4 per room.
Yes.
So 3 breakout rooms.
3 breakout rooms. Yeah, sure. Yep. I'll do that now.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to have a chat. Then we'll come back and we'll see what everybody's come up with. So please do nominate someone as a spokesperson in your room to be able to say, yes, this is what we talked about in our group. And so Ellen, do you want to just take me out of a room? And I don't know if you can. I think you can take me out. I won't join that room until later unless you... No, that's all right. Like I said, usually when I do this myself, it just keeps me out because I'm the host.
Yeah, it's going to keep me out, but it keeps trying to put you in.
You can put yourself into a room if you want to, and I just won't join the room.
Yep, sure.
And then, actually, maybe you better not join the room either because we'll need to keep the eye on the time and then bring everybody back in.
Yep, but I can jump between the rooms though.
Okay,
so
if you want to do that, that's...
Yep.
Yep. So how's everybody going with joining? Everybody see the link to be able to join into their breakout room? Ellen, we've got three, 1, 2, 3, 4 who I'm not sure if what's going on, but they haven't seemed to have joined their breakout rooms.
Yeah, they definitely got a request, but I think no one's kind of gone into the room, and it ended up just being me and Misha in a room and everyone else was not in a room.
Okay, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so none of the other breakout rooms got the invitation.
No, I think they did get it. I'll send it again, but I'm just not sure.
Okay, then maybe just give it like another, if it doesn't work, we'll just bring it back and we'll just talk about it en masse.
Yeah, okay, I'll try it one more time.
Now, I didn't get one that time. Oh, maybe I did. Amanda, Sean, and Sarah, if you're there and you've got problems with the breakout room, you can certainly stay here, have a chat with me, and then wait till everybody else comes back. We can talk about their experiences. About how you think you would approach somebody who is experiencing distress. Okay.
Hey, Bronwyn.
How are we going?
Kind of happened again. It ended up just being me and Misha in the room again.
Okay. So, all right, so let's just close down the breakout. Whoops, I just closed the chat instead. Let's just close down the breakout rooms and we'll just come back and we'll see what people want to contribute to it.
Yep, so they're closed down, so everyone's back in this room.
Excellent. So everyone's back?
Yep.
Fabulous. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Sorry about the confusion there. So we're not quite sure what was going on with the breakout rooms, the joys of having to depend on technology there. But Akanksha mentioned that, in terms of approaching somebody who is distressed, that it is certainly going to depend on who that person is, if it's somebody that you actually know, or if it's not somebody, or if it's somebody that you don't know terribly well. And that may very well influence, those decisions that you actually make. Did anybody come up with anything or have something that they wanted to contribute that they thought was relevant in terms of, what you could do to approach someone? Yeah, like I said, happy for people to pop things in the chat if they're not sure about using microphones and that kind of thing. But if not, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, could you start by just asking if they're okay?
Absolutely. That's a perfect one. So if we think about the fact that there is actually an Are You OK Day, that is a national initiative, and that is a great way of being able to start the conversation. The thing is that in Australia, we have a tendency to ask rhetorical questions without actually expecting just detailed answers from people. So sometimes if you ask someone, "Are you okay?" their instinct, their natural reaction is going to be, "Yep, I'm fine," even if they're not. So it can be actually really helpful to have some other little questions to ask them. Like it might be saying, "I've noticed that you seem tired," or "I've noticed that you seem a bit agitated. What's going on? Is there anything going on for you at the moment, or is there something distressing you at the moment?" Even better yet, asking questions that are a little bit more open-ended, so that the person's got an invitation to actually share, a bit more. But if you've seen something, like we talked about those signs of distress in the past, if you've seen something, you can mention that, and that will help them to feel that somebody's actually caring about them, to actually ask whether they're okay or not. If you do approach somebody who's distressed, do try and listen to them in a way that's respectful of them, that's understanding of them and non-threatening. And in order to do that, do think about things like your body posture and your tone of voice. So a lot of our communication is actually in these, not the language specifically that we speak, but how we actually do that. So the way that we hold and move our bodies and the tone of our voice. Sometimes people might say things to you that you don't actually agree with, that you think are strange or what have you. If that's the case, try to avoid confrontation with them. Just listen. You don't have to agree or disagree. So effectively what you're trying to do is to be an empathetic an empathetic listener with someone in this sort of situation. You're not trying to be a counselor. It is not your job as an innocent bystander to try and counsel somebody who's experiencing distress. You're just trying to touch base with them and say, "Hey, is everything okay?" Make them feel that there is actually somebody out there who cares, so that you can then perhaps direct them to some of the other resources that we're going to talk about in a little while. Having said that, do be aware of the fact that there are some cultural norms or cultural stigmas that might play in this sort of situation. So for example, some cultures are much more resistant to expressing it verbally if they do have a mental health concern, or whether that's stress or worry or whatever it may be. And those sorts of experiences then may be more likely to present in a physical way. So they might be experiencing insomnia, or more of the upset tummies or the headaches or those sorts of things. And if that's the case for someone, then you could certainly say to them, "Well, it sounds like that's pretty rough. How about going and seeing a GP?" And that's usually something that people don't find as potentially culturally threatening as they may the idea of going and talking to a counselor or something like that. The reality is that mental health is something that is definitely on a continuum that everybody sits on, and it is something that goes from where people are functioning in a very positive, healthy way, through to situations where people are experiencing pretty severe impact on their day-to-day functioning. When it comes to postgraduate students and the PhD experience, there was some study that was done in 2017. It was an article by a woman by the name of Elizabeth Payne, and she was looking at the article was titled "PhD Students Face Significant Mental Health Challenges." And she took this from research that was done by Levesque et al. In 2017, and they actually said that approximately 1/3 of PhD students are at risk of having or developing a common psychiatric disorder like depression. So, the experiences that HDR students have is even more significant in terms of threatening their well-being than those of general tertiary students. And we saw from the work that we looked at previously that tertiary students in general are at higher risk than the general population. So that study by Levesque, they're actually from the University of Ghent in Belgium, and they showed that when they basically looked at 3 different groups. So they looked at highly educated people in the general population, highly educated employees, and then highly educated PhD students, and found that those PhD students were 2.4 times more likely to fall victim than the general population, and 1.83 times more likely than other education students to fall victim to psychological distress and developing mental health disorders. So you may be somebody who is used to being up this end, but the stress and strain of a PhD might sort of push you down in this direction, or you might see this happening in your friends and fellow students as well. So what I want to do, what I want you to know is, first of all, reassure you that it's normal to be moving along here, that being in a situation where you're normally sitting up here, but you have a bit of a drop down to the other end, again, is really normal. When we're looking for issues of concern, whether it's for you yourself or whether it's for someone else, is when you're staying down at this more negative end and it's affecting your performance in your studies or in your work, it's impacting your ability to care for yourself, it's impacting your relationships with other people, and that's going on for longer periods of time. You know, if it's happening for a couple of hours or even a couple of days, that's probably, you know, fairly normal, particularly as a PhD student. But if it's going on for weeks, then that is a potential problem. We want to get to you guys before it gets beyond that point of just being, you know, a stress and actually going to something that's more significant concern. And I guess those more significant concerns beyond beyond stress are that experience of mental illness. So when we're talking about mental illness, what we're talking about is something that causes significant changes to the way somebody thinks, the feelings that they actually experience, and as a result, the behaviors, the way that they actually respond to those thoughts and feelings. And it's certainly something that is going to impair their functioning, and in more than just one area of life. So it's going to, as I said, impact their ability to work or to study, to care for themselves and for others, meet their responsibilities, and so on and so forth. And as I said, it's also something that persists over time. So for example, the experience of depression is something that lasts for more than 2 weeks. The experience of these are clinical situations. Clinical depression is going to last for more than 2 weeks. Clinical anxiety is going to last for more than 4 weeks. So as I said before, common mental illnesses are going to affect up to 1 in 5, so 20% of the general population of Australian adults in any given year, and only a very small percentage of those, only just over a third, actually seek professional help. We actually know that in Australia, mental illness is the third largest disease burden in the country. That's really pretty significant when you think about, you know, the significant disease burden that we do have through things like, you know, cancer, but that's the third largest disease burden. That's going to be impacting not only the medical systems and medical services, but it's also going to be impacting, you know, other sorts of areas of our economy and the workforce. So some people are certainly more at risk of developing a mental illness than others, and that can be because of biological factors like genetics. It can be because of psychological factors like personality traits or you know, lived experiences with, you know, for example, trauma or something like that, or it can be social factors, so something along the lines of, you know, the socioeconomic status that you have, which is going to impact your ability to have good nutrition or access to, you know, support services and those sorts of things. Because mental illness does have the capacity to affect so many people and to have such a big impact on our society, and also because the longer a mental illness goes on, the harder it is to get back to that green end of that spectrum, early intervention is actually really important, and it prevents people from the problems that people have from becoming more serious, and it also reduces secondary effects. So things like likelihood to develop another mental illness, dependence on drugs or alcohol, loss of income, those sorts of things. So early intervention is important for those reasons, and also to help speed the pace of someone's recovery. So some of the mental health crises that people might actually experience, so these are the things where we would think, regardless of what it is that the person is experiencing, we might have to potentially step in and get them professional help, even if they're quite resistant to that. And that could be certainly someone who is at immediate risk of suicide. So they're engaging in not only suicidal thoughts that indicate a plan and a significant intention, but in the immediate future, or people that are already engaging in suicidal behaviors, such as purchasing weapons or other tools that they might use to engage in that sort of behavior, or making threats immediately with those things. But it can also include non-suicidal self-injury. So this is situations where self-harm is of a type or of an intensity that it could cause serious, potentially life-threatening harm to the person. Panic attacks may be a situation where a professional needs to be called in if it's not something that resolves fairly quickly. Certainly people who have experienced trauma, in the immediacy of that trauma, do need some sort of professional help, and the type is going to vary. It may just be first responder support, it may be medical support, it may be counselling support, but that certainly could be a potential crisis time. Doesn't always have to be, because there are lots of people who do actually experience crisis but recover from it quite effectively and rapidly without any external intervention. A severe psychotic state is another reason why people might have a health crisis. A severe intoxicated state, alcohol poisoning or withdrawal from alcohol or substances. If someone is exhibiting aggressive behavior, that might be something. Or if they're having a mental health linked crisis that's causing a medical emergency. So for example, if someone is in the real meaty end of an eating disorder that has gotten to the point where they are, fainting or collapsing, experiencing muscle pain, experiencing blood and stools, vomit, urine, that sort of thing. So there are actually crisis situations out there for mental health. Hopefully you guys are not going to be in a situation where you would have to be dealing with that too much. What's probably more likely is that you would be in a situation where you would notice that somebody wasn't coping very well, and you might feel as though you wanted to actually give them a little bit of help. So how are we doing for time? We're doing okay. So we may not do this next activity because I did have another activity planned, but given the fact that our breakout rooms haven't been working terribly well, I might just throw this open to the floor and see if anybody wants to contribute. So a couple of questions for you regarding mental illness. What do you think some of the risk factors are? Who are the professionals that can help with mental health concerns? There's some that are obvious and some maybe not so obvious. What are some of the non-professional supports that are out there and how can they be helpful? What sort of things contribute to the stigma of getting help? And what are the potential barriers of getting help besides the stigma? And what is it that you could actually do if the person that you're trying to help doesn't actually want help in that moment? So first of all, does anybody know what some of the risk factors are? We kind of mentioned a couple briefly before. And I'm happy for you to either pop it in the chat or to turn the microphone on and contribute that way.
So I think one of the risk factors that you mentioned before is, for example, stress.
Absolutely.
Others are, for example, I would guess also problems within the family.
Yes. So whether that's problems because of conflict in the family or whether it's because of a lack of a supportive family, a social network, absolutely both of those increase people's risk of developing mental illness.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to contribute?
I would also say maybe genetic reasons, genetic predispositions.
Absolutely. There are some mental illnesses that are particularly what seem to have more of a genetic basis to them, but none of them are a straight Mendelian sort of pattern of inheritance when it comes to whether or not someone's going to develop a mental illness or not. It's much more like what you would see with somebody with breast cancer with a BRCA gene, or Lynch syndrome, which is the familial bowel cancer. So it's an epigenetic effect. If someone is carrying that gene, they're more likely to have that experience of developing mental illness, but there does still have to be those other environmental factors that will trigger the activation of that particular gene. One of the other reasons why family, not only through genetic heritability, but why family can actually be an impact is because of role modeling. So you might see situations where somebody almost learns the behaviors that are characteristic of somebody who is mentally ill because they have a mentally ill parent, and so that they grow up learning that these behaviors are actually the normal ones when in fact they actually aren't normal, healthy responses at all. What about what sort of professionals that can help with mental health? Given the faculty that you guys are in, it's probably pretty obvious that GPs are going to be able to help, psychiatrists are going to be able to help, certainly psychologists, counselors, but also things like social workers. A lot of social workers actually have some foundation in mental health as well. Occupational therapists, they're often going to have training in these sorts of areas. And then there might be other people who are still professionals that can help people to manage stress, but aren't necessarily those allied health roles. So financial counselors and advisors, or learning advisors in an academic situation. It might be something like someone who specializes in issues around gender and sexuality, that sort of thing. So there are lots of different professionals that can actually help people to manage the stresses that they're experiencing. Anybody have have some suggestions about non-professional supports?
I guess something like asking your colleagues if you see that they are not that well or different to the usual state, just asking them how are you doing, and then going a little bit further and also saying something like, yeah, I've seen that you're not looking, or that you're looking tired lately, and things like this, and not just letting it go with the, yeah, I'm fine.
Exactly. So the general, friends, family, colleagues can certainly be a good source of support. And as I mentioned before, there is actually there are people out there who are trained as mental health first aiders, and they can be sort of like a first responder for mental health sort of issues. Then there are also things out there like websites and self-help books and apps, community groups, which can actually be really helpful in providing people with support. If there's all of this support out there, we obviously know that there's some sort of concern regarding mental illness, but what are the things that actually contribute to stigma around mental illness?
So just another question, Bronwyn.
Sure, go for it.
Are there any websites you can recommend for the self-help?
I have some at the end, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some of the reasons why there is this stigma around mental illness in the community? It's certainly better than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, but it's most definitely still there.
It might be due to people not understanding it really.
Absolutely, that's going to be a big one, that people, there's a lot of ignorance and misconception and myth and misunderstanding out there about mental illness. Yep. Anything else anyone can think of? There's probably a lot of cultural impact on that as well. That for a long time, as I said, there are still some cultures, whether that's a family culture or a socioeconomic culture or a ethnic culture, whatever it may be, or religious culture even, that says this is either not real or it's something that you should be able to deal with in this very specific way. So, for example, it might be a religious group who says if you're suffering, it's just because you need to, pray more or say more Hail Marys or, burn some more incense or whatever it may be. It might be a cultural group that says this is not something that exists. This is, just you not being strong enough and not being tough enough. It might be a family group who has a motto of, I'll just take a teaspoon of cement and harden up, that sort of thing. There are all sorts of different reasons why there are stigma about mental illness, but a lot of it does come down to misunderstanding and ignorance. But because of the stigma, there are barriers. So people are scared of what other people are going to think of them. They're worried about how it could potentially impact, their study status or their work status. And then there are other things that might be barriers to people getting help, such as, the financial cost or the accessibility. So there are lots of reasons out there why only 35% of people who experience mental illness are actually getting professional help for it. But I think that if you can have some, little ideas about, or some little information in mind, like the resources that I'm going to give you later on, that can help to counter some of that stigma and help to overcome some of those barriers for people, then they've actually done a really helpful thing for that particular person. Having said that, if the person doesn't want help, you do have to be respectful of that, and you do have to just let them know that you're somebody who cares if they need to, if they want to talk, or that you're happy to try and help them find somebody, whether it's somebody professional or someone that they can talk to, so that they don't have to go through this experience alone. All right, so let's keep moving on, because we are having some issues with that, as we said, the breakout rooms. So in terms of how you can actually help, you may have noticed that there are some signs around about the place at UQ that have this three-word motif on them of support, notice, support, and refer. So when we're talking about notice, we are actually encouraging people to look out for and to listen for the signs of distress in other people. We are very much a community here, even if we are quite a large community, but we are a community, and we do have the potential to be able to support each other in additional ways to the way we actually are now. In order to support, it is very much about listening. So you certainly don't have to solve the problem for a person. You don't have to be a counselor for the person, but showing them that you are concerned, being willing to listen, and being able to having a willingness to help within boundaries and within limits, because your role as a friend or as a colleague isn't to, as we said, be their counselor, but to show a willingness to help by giving them some guidance, you know, that's a great way of being able to provide support, but you most certainly do not need to solve their problem for them. And so this idea of guidance is about referring them. So if you have some knowledge about what the appropriate services are, where they are, and how they can get to them, that's all that you really need to do in terms of your role of how you talk the talk of supporting somebody who's experiencing difficulties with their mental well-being. So let's just break this down a little bit more in this concept of support, because it can be a little bit tricky at times. So, you know, if you are in conversation with a fellow student or a student that you are tutoring, for example, and you're having some concerns about them, don't be scared to actually have a discussion with somebody. It's just two people talking. It doesn't have to be you know, particularly difficult, but it is important to check in with the person about what it is that they're actually experiencing. And that's why we're saying there to be actively engaged, to be actively listened, to be engaged, to find out what it is that the person is feeling. If you're thinking you need to start this conversation, you know, approach somebody, then, you know, let them know what it is, those things that you've actually observed that have triggered your concern for them. The active listening and the open-ended questions, as I said, you know, being curious and also trying to remain judgment-free. That doesn't mean that you can't be judging in your head, but just letting the person know that if you are making a judgment, what that actually is, because that's not going to encourage somebody to open up. Whereas your body language actually can do that by having open body language, slightly leaning forward to speak to someone, sitting next to someone rather than across from them, which can be quite feeling like they're interrogating. Keeping eye contact with them, nodding, just making them feel heard can make a really big difference. But let them know if you've seen something that has caused you for concern. And you might be expressing your care just simply by saying, I'm concerned about you, I'm worried about you, you know, I think something might be wrong and I want to help, whatever that may be. But as I said, when it comes to expressing that willingness to help, do make sure that it is within the boundaries of your role. And one of the ways that you can actually set some boundaries around that is ask who it is that they normally go to when they're in this situation. So it might be that they normally see a GP, or that they have a counsellor, or that they talk to their mum or their best friend or whatever, finding out who that person is and then just encouraging them to talk to that person. Because they, for one reason or another, particularly in the time of COVID, they may not necessarily have connected with that person as much as they usually would. So when it comes to, you know, the language, I guess, that you could use, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an example here. So in terms of how to suggest to others that they might actually need support, because that can be a little bit scary when you do it for the first time. So it might be something as simple as what we have here. I can see that things are difficult for you at the moment and I'm concerned about you. I think that you could use some help in sorting all of this out. And I'd like you to consider talking to one of the advisors at Student Services. And, you know, assuming that people are going to be a little bit resistant, have some barriers, say, look, it's, you know, you going there is voluntary, it's free, everything's confidential, it doesn't go beyond their office. So that can often help to, you know, allay some of the fears that people might actually have. You know, but as I keep banging on about, you know, you are not responsible for the other people in your research team, for your students, or, you know, whatever that, or the other students, the other postgrad students in your groups, when it comes to their mental health. You can express care and concern, but you're not responsible for them. So if you make suggestions and they don't take that on board, kind of comes back to that old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So you have to let go of it a little bit. And sometimes that comes down to considering that maybe you've planted a seed that you may not get to see being watered and come to growth, but that you saying something at that point might have made them start thinking and might have put them on a road to change and hopefully recovery as well. So, oops, there we go. That's for some reason decided to hang around. So in that concept of referring, certainly here at UQ, you have the advantage of being able to refer to Student Services. And here we have counsellors. As I said, we have the disability, diversity and inclusion advisors. We have international student and international student and welfare advisors, amongst others that we have here. So suggest that they make an appointment with somebody at Student Services, depending on what the actual problem is. I mean, if somebody's struggling, about worries about their career for the future, maybe you're better off sending them to one of our careers advisors than necessarily to a counsellor. But thinking about who the appropriate person is to refer them to, or if you're not sure, just say, look, did you know that we've got Student Services and they've got a whole bunch of people there that can support? Why don't we go have a look at their website together? Something like that could be helpful. If there's somebody who's in, a significant amount of distress, it might be helpful for you to actually say, look, do you want me to call them for you? And then you can talk to them, that sort of thing, or call and talk to us while they're present if they agree to that. If somebody is at a state where you're really worried about their well-being, if they are showing some of those crisis signs, but you're not thinking, okay, this is the point where I need to call an ambulance or something, particularly if I've already called and made an appointment for them. And again, this is whether it's a fellow student or a postgrad student, someone in your lab, or whether it's someone that you might be supporting as a tutor or teacher or what have you. If they're in that sort of state of distress, do try to walk them to Student Services, because we have had situations before where somebody's called with the student there, have made the appointment, person's walked out the door, and they've never made it to us. So, that is really important to make sure that they aren't left alone if they are in those significant states of distress. When it comes to follow-up, check with them about whether they feel like they've received the help that they actually need, or whether, maybe something else is warranted. Because if you contact us and say, look, I referred a student or I referred a friend, what happened? We can't actually tell you because of confidentiality. If the person, resists that you saying to them, look, I think you actually need to get help, and you're still, really uncomfortable about the situation, worried about them, you can actually submit a welfare check. And again, that can be on, your students, your fellow postgrads, that sort of thing. And there's a form for that in Student Hub. And all you have to do in that is give us details about them and what your concern actually is, and then we will follow up with them. And if you don't want to be named as being the person who's put that welfare request through, you don't necessarily need to be. So that can help you to feel that you've done something productive and helpful for the person, but also helps you to let go of potentially carrying around responsibilities that aren't actually yours. So if you do happen to come across one of those crisis scenarios that we mentioned before, first and foremost, make sure that you keep yourself safe and any other people that might be in the vicinity. If safety is a significant issue, if you're on campus, do call our security first, because if ambulances or police or anything like that are necessary, or fire department or whatever it may be, security has to be there to guide them to the appropriate point in the campus. So don't call 000 straight away from the phone, call security and they will do it, and follow the on-site procedures that we have here. If it's off campus, then call 000. And even if you're not sure who the best person would be in terms of first responders, they can certainly help you out with that. If you're in that crisis state and you're trying to talk to someone, do consider things like, the time and the place that you're doing it. If it's a crisis because they're drinking excessively and you're worried about them, developing a dependency or something, talking to them while you're on a dance floor is probably not a great idea. So thinking about that sort of thing, and also about the person's confidentiality. So not having a discussion with them across the lab bench when there's 10 other people in the room. Don't be afraid to ask people if they are thinking about taking their own life. There's some misconceptions out there that asking these questions will either put the idea into someone's head or will encourage them to act on it if they've already had those thoughts. And we actually know that this isn't true. It indicates that you're a caring person who's willing to have tough conversations, and it makes them feel valued. So don't be afraid to ask directly, are you thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? One of the best things you can do if you're trying to support somebody who is experiencing psychological distress or mental health difficulties is, as we said before, listen, and then just provide them some hope that things can actually change. Let them know that they don't have to go through it alone, and that's why it comes back to referring them to appropriate supports, to people who can get that change process happening. So try not to leave them alone if they are in that crisis, and get them to us, so that either us or to the UQ Health Centre, so that we can provide that crisis support. So some of the resources that are available for you at UQ. I'm very happy to send these slides through to Misha if Misha and Ellen want to distribute them to people afterwards. But of course, I think we're recording this, so that's an avenue as well. But there are lots of different support resources available at UQ. So in terms of health, there's certainly UQ Health, and then there's a range of student-run clinics, such as the UQ Psychology Clinic, and they're all conducted either significantly reduced or even free for UQ students. Then there's also the Student Advocacy Service through the UQ Union, and they can be there to help students with issues of education and equity, including grievances. And you know, sometimes it happens that that's a grievance or a discrimination issue with a supervisor. They can help with issues of employment while you're studying, rather than careers. They're helping with employment, you know, part-time employment while people are studying. They can also help with legal and migration issues, particularly for international students, what general welfare and well-being of people. There's the UQ Ally Network, and they're a group of both students and staff who are there to provide a safe and welcoming environment for people of the LGBTIQA+ community. There's a website section of UQ's website that is dedicated to that, who tells you who the local allies are. There'll be people that you see wearing this little rainbow badge, and they're ones that members of that community can go to if they're experiencing you know, discomfort or concern or needing support in some way. We also have the ATSIS unit, which is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Support Unit. And that's there to form a community for those members of UQ as well, and provide support for each other. Then we also have the discrimination harassment contact officers, who are there to give people information if they are, and this is sort of more from the staff perspective, so this will be for you in your roles, your overlapping roles of being a staff member as well as an HDR student. They're there to help if you do have those sort of issues, to find out what your options are in terms of pursuing issues of discrimination and harassment. The Graduate School, of course, has lots of supports available too. And if you go to their website and look up contacts, you can find out information about who the HDR Administrative Officer, Liaison Officer, and Postgraduate Coordinator are in your enrolling unit. And those are people that you can discuss if you're having problems associated with things like your management of your candidature, or leave, or, you know, sick leave, difficulties with, you know, resources, even problems with your supervisors as well. They also have the career development framework, which I've mentioned before, and there are a number of workshops, a lot of workshops on there that may be potentially relevant for you. And then we, of course, have student services, where I'm based. And as I said, we have a range of advisors and programs available. And we actually include in our brief the Multi-Faith Chaplaincy Centre. So if you have people who you're supporting who are feeling a spiritual need that they want to be met, we can direct them there. As well as the individual appointments that we do, we have our own online groups. For example, there's a self-compassion group that's been running this year. It's wrapped up now for the year, but we'll be hopefully running again next year. We also run a whole range of workshops that graduate students are welcome to attend as well. They're not just for undergrads. And then this is a great one for you to have, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for someone that you might be trying to help out, is that we actually have a crisis line. Now, I've got 24/7 on there, and that's not completely accurate. If you happen to call that number during the daytime, it's just going to come through to our reception. So it's actually designed to be an out of hours number. So, but it means that somebody is available, you know, to help in some way, whether it's, you know, setting you up with an appointment or whether it's that immediate crisis support, you know, most of the time. So that's available after hours, on weekdays, on weekends, on public holidays, and all of that sort of thing. And if you call that number, you do actually get through if you call it after hours, you do get through to a counsellor. And if you identify yourself as being if you identify yourself according to your UQ student number, then they will actually let us know that you've contacted, and we can actually, the rest of the student services team can actually follow up on the next working day and help to get you through whatever the concern is that you may be having at that particular point in time. So in terms of student services specifically, we have appointments that are available face-to-face, by telephone, or we're doing Zoom now rather than Skype. All UQ students get up to 10 sessions of counselling per calendar year. In addition to our counselling service, we also have the SMSU, which is a sexual misconduct support service for people who've experienced sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, or sexual assaults.
In addition to the counsellors, we have our disability, diversity and inclusion advisors who can help people who are experiencing either physical or mental health concerns, and they can be ones that are acute or chronic. We have our learning advisors, and they're a fabulous team, and again, not just for undergraduates. And in fact, 3 of our learning advisors have PhDs themselves. You've probably come across them in various things that the grad school have actually put on, and they can help with things like time management, which can be a corker when you're doing an HDR degree, and they can also help with things like milestone documentation, that sort of thing. We have our student advisors who can help with international students, specifically in welfare. So that's more along the practical sort of side of things. We have accommodation advisors who can help if you've got difficulties with flatmates or with tenancy agreements or with landlords. And then we also have careers advisors who are part of the Student Employability Centre. And you have a postgrad specific one that's at the grad school, but you also have access to these, to our team too. Then in terms of those sort of more individual appointments, we also have the workshops, as I mentioned before, and we also have some groups. So we have an art therapy group. Freedom from Your Cage is a body neutrality group for people who have experience with body image issues or body and eating disorder issues. And then I run a canine co-counselling program, which actually has a trained therapy dog coming in and being part of the therapy sessions. If you're interested in booking an appointment with any one of our advisors, you can actually do that online through Student Hub. But if you want to get in direct contact with us at St. Lucia, we're in building 21D, but we are also at Hurston as well. The telephone number for St. Lucia is there, along with our email, and you can contact that for bookings at Hurston as well as at St. Lucia. And you can find out more about all of the services that we offer on our website, which is listed there. So just in terms of some external supports that may be relevant for you, Lifeline is certainly a great one because it's available 24/7, as is Kids Helpline, which is relevant for anyone up to the age of 25. So that might still cover some postgraduate students or potentially, as I said, undergraduate students that you might be supporting. There's Men's Helpline to deal with more male-centered issues and also to provide male counsellors for people. There's the suicide callback service, which is basically, as it says, if someone is experiencing suicide or supporting somebody with suicidal thoughts or has lost someone to suicide, they can call that number, give theirs, and then a specialist counsel will actually call them back. There's Beyond Blue, who have some fabulous resources on it. So if you're wanting to find out more about the experiences of anxiety and depression, how they're treated, what sort of things are helpful, they have some great downloadable brochures on their website. Headspace is another great one. And Headspace also has very reduced cost counselling available to people through mental health care plans. Diverse Voices is specifically for the LGBTIQA plus group. They're not 24/7, but they're between 3 p.m. and midnight. 1-800-RESPECT is there specifically for people who have experienced sexual assault or domestic violence. Reach Out is another one that is a bit more of a general counselling service. The Carers Leave Australasia Network is for those people who are caring for others. So it might be that you are caring for a child who has autism, or you're caring for a parent who has dementia, and you're experiencing stress and difficulties because of that. And then, of course, there's the Human Rights, the Queensland Human Rights Commission. So if you're experiencing racism, then you're actually able to call them and report it and get some guidance around that. So there's a lot of resources that are actually out there that are available to you. And you certainly don't have to go through, as I said, any of these experiences on your own. There's also, which I don't think I put up there, Relationships Australia. They are available Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and they do counselling, mediation and workplace services to help relationships of all different types, not just marriages. And Reach Out Australia is actually, as I said, it's a broad one. That's an online mental health organisation for young people and for their parents. So it's that family dynamic, that family therapy approach. So I think we've got some time now to be able to open up the floor to questions. Thank you very much for having me. Like I said, if you have questions about this presentation today, I'm very happy for you to get in contact with me. My email address is on the screen, but I'm very happy to open it up to any questions you may have. I'm just going to have a sip of water first. Happy for you to put those in the chat, or for you to pop your microphones on and ask, whichever actually is more convenient and comfortable for you, depending on your circumstances.
Thank you very much for this great workshop, Bronwyn.
Thank you for having me.
It was really good to hear some options of how to help people who might need some help. And also,
I might just say that if people are interested in finding out more about that or gaining more skills in it, we do actually, through the Mental Health Champions Network, conduct mental health first aid training, and sometimes the graduate school actually runs it as well. So I've just completed some for the graduate school, and we'll be completing some in the coming months for the Mental Health Champions Network. So if that's something that you're interested in, you're certainly welcome to do it through those avenues. You're also welcome to do it through the staff development program that they have as well. So there's a staff one and a student one, but they're essentially exactly the same material. It's just depending on who you want to be in a class with, whether you want to be with other staff members or whether you want to be with other students.
So we just got a question on the chat, if it would be possible to also share the slides with the
Absolutely.
attendees later on.
Misha, are you happy if I send them through to you and you can distribute them? Yep, happy to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Bronwyn, I did have one question, if that's okay.
Sure, Ellen.
I just wanted to ask what your advice would be if you are trying to support someone that doesn't want help and they don't want to go to any of these services, and kind of what you can do.
I guess we go through this quite a lot in mental health first aid, and it's actually about finding, one of the first things you can do is asking them about those, what's holding them back. So finding out what those barriers are, whether it is about stigma, whether it's about time, whether it's about cost, whether it's about availability, whether it's about some fear, and then trying to help them to overcome those barriers. That can be one thing that is actually helpful. But you have to come back to the fact that people have the right to say, no, I don't want help. And it can be really frustrating and difficult to sit with. And I think in that sort of situation, then it comes back to you saying, yep, that's your choice. If you decide that you do want to even just find out more, I'm happy to help you do that. Or maybe we can, guide you to someone else who can give you more definitive answers, and then just once in a while maybe check in on them. But if you nag or blackmail or anything like that, it's actually going to turn them off. So you kind of have to respect the fact that they may make that choice. But as I said before, the fact that you've said something, that you've expressed concern, that you've given them some ideas, even if they don't act on it immediately, may actually plant some seeds that mean that they do make change later on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have another question.
Sure. What
would you recommend from which point onwards? Because sometimes it might be that someone just has a, let's say, rough week.
Yeah.
From which point onwards should someone who sees something like this in one of his colleagues, friends, whoever, start talking with the other person more intense about it? Because, for example, if with the first attempt, the other person is saying, yeah, everything's fine, I just have a really rough week with whatever, and it all makes sense for you, but it starts continuing, and so from which point onwards do you think you should go more into deep?
Sure. I guess if it's a case of it's something that you've observed in someone and they say, yeah, I haven't been feeling great, find out from them how long it's been going on for. And if it is something that they're saying, oh, I've been feeling like this for weeks or months, then that's probably an indicator. Like I said, if it's starting to get past that 2-week mark, it's probably indicative of that it's not just a situational experience. And that might be something that you want to offer some more guidance for. If it's a situation where you've said to somebody, hey, is everything okay? And they're like, yep, I'm fine. And you know that they're not fine. Then I think it comes down to that, again, telling them what it is that you've observed, using I statements and saying, I've noticed, or I've seen, or I'm concerned because, and you seem really tired, or you seem grumpy, or you haven't been coming to things, whatever it may be, whatever it is that you've actually observed. You seem stressed, your body seems tense, you seem whatever, using those sorts of things. But I've noticed, I think, I feel, I'm concerned. So that it doesn't become about attacking them or judging them. It just becomes about you expressing yourself, and that gives them the opportunity to have that conversation kind of a little bit more on their own terms. And I mean, there still may be times when they, are very resistant. And it may be about you saying to them, look, I understand if you don't want to talk to me, but, it might be a good idea if you did talk to someone. Is there someone else in your life that you would talk to, at times of stress or times of difficulty? And they might say, yep, I'll do that. And then, it's sort of out of your hands. And I guess that's sort of part of what I was talking about with recognizing your responsibility and the boundaries around you as a student, that you are not expected, there is no expectation for you to take on the burdens of everyone around you. What this is about is just giving you some ideas about what you can do if you are placed in this sort of situation, so that you don't feel helpless and like you could have done something, but you didn't know what to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfectly sense. Thanks
Good.
for this.
You're welcome. Amanda, did I see your microphones pop on before?
Yes, very observant, Bronwyn. Yeah. I guess I was wondering, I imagine that this is probably a year that the services from student services have been called upon a little bit more than usual.
A little bit.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could comment on if you do manage to get someone to the point where they would be comfortable to reach out. I imagine it would be pretty disappointing if they were to go to student services and then they'd hear
wait
back
for
that,
4 weeks.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what kind of logistics are in the background of this support?
Yeah. I guess when it does come to student services, because we are a free service and we try to make it as equitable as possible by saying that people can only have one appointment in the system at a time. So people can't book up a whole bunch of appointments over the year, because we try to make it available to everyone as much as possible. But that does mean that we do have a longer wait period, and it doesn't seem to matter how many more people we employ. The wait list still keeps, the wait time still seems to be about the same because of the increased demand, particularly this year. So I guess one of the things that, again, that we talk about this in mental health first aid training is the idea of giving somebody a couple of different options, so that way, if one thing doesn't gel with them, or they try it doesn't work for them, they have something else to fall back on. So it might be about saying, look, we've got student services, you've got the UQ Health Centre, and they've got a psychologist and psychiatrists down there if you need them, or they can create a mental health care plan for you so that you can connect with somebody externally if that's what you would prefer. In terms of other things that student services offer, we do have a program called Uni Wellbeing, which is an online program that's based around cognitive behavioural therapy, and it usually I think we don't run it during I can't remember if it's December or January that it doesn't run, but somewhere around that Christmas period we don't run it, but it pretty much runs the rest of the year. And when students sign up for it, they can sign up there's a new group basically that goes through every 2 weeks, and each time it's a 5-week program, but you do the content of it online in your own time whenever it suits you. And there's actually only 4 weeks of content. So if something happens and you have to miss a week, that's fine. But it's about teaching you the cognitive behavioral therapy approach to building skills to help manage things like anxiety, depression, worry, stress, procrastination, which are common amongst students. And then over the course of the 5 weeks, one of the counsellors who's actually involved with that will give the person a call and check in with them, ask how, catch up with them, see how they're doing, answer any questions that they might have about the content, and help them if they need it with any planning for how to implement those skill building during the following week. So sometimes what we can do, if we know somebody is experiencing anxiety but they can't get into 4 weeks, we can get them into Uni Wellbeing and start them with some skill building beforehand. We also have each day a number of triage appointments that are available. So the triage appointments are there for students who are at immediate risk of harm to themselves or to others. So so they are kept expressly for that purpose. But that if you do have somebody who is in one of those crisis states, certainly bring them down, get them in touch with us, because we'll do whatever we can to actually fit them in. Other things that we can do is that if somebody contacts and wants to be able to see a counsellor for a particular reason, it might be like, oh, I'm really stressed about my, my upcoming milestone, for example, and we say, okay, we can't get you in to see a counsellor for 3 weeks, but we can get you in to see a learning advisor in 3 days. Let's get you started with some skill building there and then get you into that counselling appointment. So there's lots of different avenues that we can pursue to make sure that somebody feels cared for and supported, even when we can't get them into a counselling appointment immediately. Does that help answer that question, Amanda?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw
Okay,
Ellen's microphone just pop back on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if there's no more questions coming through, we might start to wrap it up.
Sure.
That's all good. So thank you very much, Bronwyn. That was a really great talk with lots of really important information and
Thank you.
some really good resources there that we will definitely send out to everybody.
Absolutely. And don't forget about the poll.
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen now and Misha's going to put the poll up.
I'll close mine down so that there we go. And I will head off so that you can do your polling in private, even though I know it's anonymous and all of that sort of thing, but I'll head off so that you can do that. And I will email through to both you and Misha the slides from today so that you can distribute them to anybody who's after them.
Okay.
But again, thank you very much for having me, everybody. And I hope that it has been useful for you. And thank you, Misha and team, for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. It's been really
Thank
great.
you. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
So for everyone that's left, this is just a schedule that we've got coming up over the next 2 days. So if you're interested in any of these really cool workshops, make sure that you go along to them, as well as the student presentations. And cool, so we've got 100% of people have voted in the poll now, so I will close that down. And yeah, so that's the end of today's session. So thanks everyone for coming and hope that we see you in the sessions that are happening over the next few days.